This tutorial presents and reviews the IoWaDSS planning tool. The planning tool provides a framework for watershed plan development and management by highlighting key issues for consideration when planning and implementing watershed adaptation options and plans. The planning tool consists of 7 steps. Step 1, objective. Step 2, resources. Step 3, alternative. Step 4, assessment. Step 5, selection. Step 6, implementation. And Step 7, evaluation. This tutorial will review steps 1 through 5 by highlighting key interface designs and actions. As of the date of this tutorial, you can only view the planning tool by first selecting specific projects, then click on the Middle Cedar River Basin and load the point of interest. We will review the planning tool in a sequential process starting with plan selection and creation. The IoWaDSS planning tool has options for users to store previous plans or view ongoing plans. In the previous plan section, you can view the project name, project category, developer, and the publication date. In the ongoing plan section, you can view the project name, project category, plan progress, the developer, and when it was last modified. In this section, you can also create a new plan. To create a new plan, click the Create Plan button. A planning form will show up where you enter the plan name, the project lead. You can also enter the planning category, such as flood mitigation, drought mitigation, water quality improvement, soil erosion, habitat and ecosystem services, wetlands, land management, and multi-objective. After selecting your planning category, click Next. You will be brought to the objective step of the planning tool. In the objective step of the planning tool, you can define your problem statement, your constraints, and your stakeholders. In the problem statement section, you can define your goal and specific objectives. For example, your goal may be to minimize the impact of floods in the basin, while your specific objectives might be to identify solutions that are socially, economically, and environmentally acceptable for reducing flood, drought, and water quality impact. Within the second tab, you can set constraints within your plan. The factors of constraints can range as your level of knowledge, previous experience, limitations on your resources, the time frame, and the estimated budget range. For any stakeholders you would like involved in this plan, you can input their first name, last name, email, organization, skills, and resources they might have available. As this concludes the objective section, you can either press Next or press the number 2 to move on to the next step, which is resources. In the resources step of the planning tool, you can either view different resource types, such as data resources, previous plans, previous models, or additional resources. You can also view other existing resources within the watershed, such as PDFs, or you can add your own new resource for other people to view as well. For resource type, if I select data resources, I am brought to the data resource section of the IoWaDSS. For the data resource section of the IoWaDSS, there is already an existing tutorial. The link for the data resources tutorial is provided below this video in the description section. To go back to the planning tool, select Go Back to Planning. Another resource type you can select is Previous Plans. This will bring you back to the previous plan section within the planning tool. To go directly back to resources, press the number 2 in the plan progress bar. To view previous models within the resource section, select Previous Models. After selecting Previous Models, you'll be brought to the Overview section where you can view all the previous models within the watershed. To go back to the resource section within the planning tool, select Go Back to Planning. You can view additional resources by selecting Additional Resources in the Resource Type section. In the Additional Resource section, you can view existing resources for this watershed or add a new resource for your watershed. This summarizes the resource section of the planning tool. We will now talk about Step 3, Alternatives, the planning tool. You can go to Step 3 by selecting Next or pressing the 3 in the planning progress bar. Step 3 of the planning tool was designed for the Cedar Rapids multi-hazard tournament. Therefore, we will discuss the actions and interfaces in reference to the multi-hazard tournament. For more information on the multi-hazard tournament, watch Part 1 of this tutorial. The link for Part 1 is provided below this video in the description section. Step 3 has 5 main components: the turn scenario display, the turn action display, the budget display, the GIS mapping component, and the alternative strategy selection menu. The turn scenario display showed which turn and climate scenario was in play throughout the multi-hazard tournament gameplay. In this example, the turn scenario display reads turn 1 and historic climate record, while for the next turn it would read turn 2 and flood mitigation. For the third turn, the display would read turn 3 and drought. For the last turn, the display would show turn 4 and climate change. When we select our alternatives, we will go through turn 1, the historic climate record, as an example. The budget display shows the total budget that is allotted for each turn. In turn 1, users are given a total of $1.6 billion to spend on alternatives. Of the $1.6 billion, $800 million is allotted to localized actions, while another $800 million is allotted to watershed actions. The budget display also shows the operation and management costs for localized actions and watershed actions. The operation and management costs for localized actions and watershed actions will be subtracted from the next turn budget. For example, in turn 2 for the flood mitigation climate scenario, teams are given a total of $62 million to spend on alternatives. Therefore, for turn 1, we see we have $31 million in localized action, operation and management cost, and $31 million in watershed actions for operation and management costs. If I select a localized action such as levies, the operation and management costs for localized actions will be updated. I can see in the budget section that $350 million of my total has been spent, $350 million to localized actions, $0 to watershed actions, and I also have $36,000 of operation and management costs to localized actions. As the last item in the budget list, I can see my next turn budget, showing that, considering operation and management costs, I have $36,000 spent of the $62 million. Now that we discussed the budget items, we can go through and select the alternatives. The localized alternatives will be selected first. For the localized actions, I chose to raise well intakes, install a new deep water well, install nitrate removal equipment, and have levees as a structural action. As a non-structural action, I chose to have a moderate number of structures relocated. As you can see, I'm well within the total budget and the budget for localized actions. However, if I would have selected a high number of structures to be relocated, I would have gone over budget in the localized action section and over budget on my operations and management section. The T1 indicates all the actions I took for turn 1, while in other turns there may be a T2 or a T3 indicating the actions taken during turn 2 and the actions taken during turn 3. Next, we can choose a strategy for watershed actions. The watershed management actions consist of changes that are either land cover changes or land management changes. The alternative options for the land cover changes interact and coordinate with the GIS mapping component. In order for the SWOT model, the Soil and Water Assessment tool, to run correctly behind the scenes, you must select land cover change options that add up to 100%. If I select contour buffer strips in a moderate number of acres, I account for 50% of the land cover area. If I choose a low number of acres for a riparian buffer, that accounts for 25% of the 100% needed. Now, if I choose a low number of acres for restored wetlands, I account for 25% of the area as well. As you can see, all my options add up to 100%, 25% for riparian buffer, 50% for contour buffer strips, and 25% for restored wetlands. Now I can finish my adaptation option selection by selecting cover crops, nutrient management, and denitrifying bioreactors. As you can see, all the constraints are met by my budget and my land cover options, so I'm ready to move on to the next turn, step 4. To move on to step 4 of the planning tool, click Assess Alternatives in the Turn Action display. Then, for verification, press Assess Alternative in the pop-up window. Step 4 of the planning tool provides the output of scores given from the input of the alternatives in step 3. There are tabs that provide breakdowns of the scores and an overview. In the Overview tab, you can see the technical score, which is given from the DSS and accounts for 60% of the team's score, while the jury score is given manually and accounts for 40% of the team's score. With the technical score from the DSS, there's the environmental section, the economic section, and the social section, each accounting for 20% of the team's score. In each of the tabs that provide the variables, we can see a breakdown of the score, given the factors that the teams were scored on, such as habitat quality, nutrient total maximum daily load compliance, power plant discharge temperature for drought, waste treatment facility for drought, waste treatment facility for flood, and a total of their score. In the economic section, the variables that the teams are scored by are private infrastructure, structure and content damages, ethanol revenue, power plants lost revenue, farm income market value, farm income easement value, water supply damages, water plant damages, roads inundated estimated damage, bridges and culverts estimated damages, and a total of the score. Within the social tab, the factors that the teams are scored on are water supply for drought, water supply for flood, private infrastructure for displaced households, number of structures, displaced households, number of people, vulnerable population, number of structures, vulnerable population, number of people. For critical infrastructure, there's hospitals, schools, emergency facilities, roads, bridges, and culverts. Then a total of the score is provided for social. After you are finished assessing your score, you can move on to the next turn, Turn 2, Flood Mitigation, by going into the Turn Action display and selecting Next Turn. As you can see, for Turn 2, we've already selected all of the possible adaptation options. This could be similar to a real-life scenario a watershed management planner would have. So we must move on to the next turn by selecting Assess Alternatives. In the pop-up, we also select Assess Alternatives. Here we can see how our adaptation option selection fared for Turn 2 in the Turn 2 section of the overview. We can also see a breakdown of our scores for Turn 2 in the Environmental tab, Economic tab, and Social tab. Again, for Turn 3, we've already used all of our adaptation options. So we can move on to assessing the alternative. Here we are given the output for Turn 3 in the Overview section, as well as we have the breakdown for Turn 3 in the Environmental section, in the Economic section, as well as the Social section. After viewing the scores, you can go to the next turn. In the last turn, Turn 4, the climate change scenario, it is similar to the first turn, where we are given $1.6 billion as a starting budget, and our adaptation options are reset. For my Turn 4 localized actions, I chose to raise well intakes, install a new deep water well, install nitrate removal equipment, and use levees as a structural action. For my non-structural action, this time I chose to elevate a moderate number of structures. For my watershed actions, for land cover changes, I chose to use a riparian buffer, a moderate number, grass waterways, a low number, and constructed wetlands, a low number of acres. It all adds up to 100% area. Satisfying this constraint and seeing that I'm well within my budget, I can assess my alternative. Just as in the previous turns, I can view my score for Turn 4 in the Overview section, Environmental section, Economic section, and Social section. To go to Step 5 of the planning tool, select Go to Selection after completing Turn 4 of Step 4 of the planning tool. Here you can read more about the selection of the tournament winner. Overall, the winner of the tournament is the team with the highest combined DSS score and the highest combined jury score of all the 4 turns. This concludes part 2 of the tutorial for the IoWaDSS planning tool. Thank you for watching.